Well, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Bermuda National Trust, I'd like to welcome you to the first in our 2022 series of Trust Talks. And this evening, we'd like to welcome Dr. William Davidson, otherwise known as Bill, who is a retired cultural geographer professor at the Louisiana State University in the USA. And he's been studying the Kapok tree for decades, traveling the world to investigate the human relationship with these remarkable specimens. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bill.
Anna, thanks so much for that nice introduction. I want to give a thanks also to the Bermuda Trust for sponsoring the talk about my favorite plant. You can see that it's the largest of the American tropical plants. And my goal today is to give you some quick photographs of where ceibas may be found, place some emphasis on the Maya, brief mention of the silk cotton tree with some Nassau examples, and conclude with a primary note on Bermuda. I haven't even gotten to the island yet, so that's not going to be too much. Ceiba pentandra is a pan-tropical species of American origins. It spread to West Africa and then to Southeast Asia. When Columbus comes in 1492 on his first voyage, they saw ceiba trees on the south side of Cuba and learned that the Taino Arawak Indians called it ceiba, and that word has spread throughout the Americas. Later on, this same tree in Southeast Asia became known as kapok, and I can remember as a child, I had a life jacket stuffed with the cottony materials out of the kapok tree, and we didn't say life preservers, we called them kapoks. And then in the English-speaking Caribbean, they're called silk cotton because of the same fiber that's found in the pods. Localized native terms still exist, such as Yaxche for the Mayas, Northern Mayas, the Southern Mayas use Inup, the Aztec, Mexican speakers say Pachote, Mosquito Indians use the word Sizhin, which is the same word as devil or evil, and Carib-speaking peoples use the word Kumaga. So Ceiba pentandra itself is the largest tree, and for that reason alone, it's probably attracted a lot of attention over the years. It reaches up to 2,000 feet, often with large buttress roots. It's a fast-growing tree, softwood. It propagates from seeds and cuttings. The environmental limits are in the tropics about 3,000 feet, 1,000 meters, and reaches sometimes about 26 degrees north normally. Has great variations in shapes. It can be shorter with a much wider canopy. I'm taking a photograph from the front steps of the church in Paline, Guatemala, and I measured this canopy and it's 206 feet wide. Other features are the silk cotton itself with the little black seeds within. The leaves are very distinctive, and the best way to determine what the species of ceiba is to see if they've got these 7 leaflets on each leaf. It's got a beautiful golden boar beetle that bothers the tree someplace, a beautiful flower. And one thing I like a lot is the ceibas are attractive homes for these oropindulas, these hanging nest of the oriole birds, and they're quite distinctive also. The research methodology we've used over the years is like most field geographers, we use landscape observation. We just look for them and we record the locations according to sites, seek the patterns, and if I can find any historical records, of course, I love to include that. I have been fortunate for 57 years to have my wife as my major field partner. She is unusual in her ability to empathize with all groups of people, constant smile, constant happy, quite supportive of me, and I use her as a model for the scale of the trees that we see. And I have included the kids too. And this is a photograph in 1980 when we crossed the Mexico-Guatemala border. There is a border river with a border Ceiba. It's sitting right there. And can you imagine the difference between a solitary adult male working among indigenous groups and abroad? What information in one adult male can get in relationship to a family? It is so much easier, and I'm sorry that I've had to use my family so much in field work, but it's been great to have them with me. Where we've looked recently are Central American countries, areas of Mexico, certain states. We did Nassau in the vicinity of Bahamas, and we've done Key West. And some of the results, we use this elaborate spreadsheet with political units on the left-hand side in states and counties, and list the number of toponyms, churches or plazas, cemeteries, and many other fields also, but these are just an idea of the spreadsheet and the detail that we use. And to date, we've been through 7 countries and 98 states and over 1,200 municipios. These are about the size of your parishes. I preferred to use the quaint term on Bermuda of tribes, but I think Anna wanted me to say parishes, so I do, but I'd rather say tribes. That's just too cool. And you can see that in Central America, Yucatan and Quintana Roo, we've done just over 10,000 trees that we have put in a cultural context. Now for Honduras alone, about 2,000 Ceiba locations, according to the categories, you can see that we've got 209 toponyms. And that in Honduras is about 1 place name of Ceiba on the maps every 100 trees. And I wonder how many Ceiba, Kapok, silk cotton place names there are in Bermuda. I have an idea. And otherwise, toponyms are so important to us because they give a culture great meaning. And if somebody thinks that you've got to have a toponym, that means it's an important landscape feature. To keep in mind as I go through quickly some slides, think about whether the Ceiba has been planted in a sacred or ceremonial situation such as church or plazas or cemeteries in some parks, or whether they've been placed in more utilitarian practical places, like perhaps to shade a sports field or in transportation or water related activities. Just keep some of these categories in mind. I selected as a chapel Ceiba slide one that showed the bell so clearly. And the reason I did that is because I know of at least 3 examples on Bermuda where cedar trees normally are placed around churches and bells are hanging from them. So I thought that was an interesting similarity. Large Ceiba, older church. Here is a new little bitty church and a new planted. I'll bet you that if we could date that Ceiba, we would find that's when the church was established also. Of course, there's a great historic record. A German traveler named Stoll passes through this Quiche Indian hamlet in Guatemala and has this beautiful illustration in his book. And there are many examples of this through history. A modern church, Plaza, Ceiba, these are everywhere in Latin America. Ceiba Cemetery, very colorful above the ground cemetery, which may be the case in Bermuda, to have above the ground cemeteries, particularly when you have limestone base, which I suspect Bermuda has. A park setting with white bottomed painted ceiba trees. And I do this of many examples because on Bermuda, I have noticed that at least in 2 examples where you have parks and obelisks, you also have ceibas. Tourism, quite frequently, a beautiful hotel, San Pedro Sula, Honduras. They put a giant ceiba tree, and I'll bet they planted it the day they built that building. Government structures, here is the foreign ministry in San Jose, Costa Rica. When John Kennedy came many years ago for a meeting of the American states, they planted this ceiba tree at the corner. At the Civic Center in El Salvador, the capital, San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, here is a local hero with a church and a ceiba tree. On the other side is the major government parliament building. All aspects of government, whether it's a jailhouse in Comayagua, Honduras, or whether it's a school, everywhere, very practical notion to have a nice big ceiba when it's hot and kids can play underneath it. Ever present. Brings me a smile to see how businesses also want to incorporate ceibas into Walmart at all levels. And here is a little mom and pop store to sell goods, and they call it Pulperia La Ceiba. And here's this beautiful ceiba tree right next to it. Which came first? I suspect the ceiba is older than the little store. As people are suggested to be experts in any field, I'm an expert in ceiba, people say. The experts, I think, of all people, are the ones who realize there's so much they don't know about their specialty. And here's one of my big problems. On the road between Guatemala City and Tegucigalpa, Honduras, there are 19 major curves like this. And on 12 of those, as you approach from this side or the other side of the highway, there's a ceiba tree right in front of you. The only thing I can believe is they cannot be there naturally. I think they have to be planted, and I must say they're there for markers. If you're driving down the highway, they're just telling you, here's a big curve, get ready. Entrances to small towns, large towns, there are hundreds of them all over Latin America. And these people are so proud of their entry ceiba that they put it on the crest of the municipio, Tambla in Honduras. And I often wonder, is that planted there to welcome people to their town, or is it planted there as a protector to their town? Now, in the case of broader border crossing, that's another type of entrance. This one happens to be between Honduras and Guatemala. Here's a ceiba, and they've got it fortified around the base. There are 24 international border crossings in Central America. 18 of those have ceibas, visible markings at the border. The other 6 are all in mountainous areas, usually surrounded by pines, but above the elevational limits, above 3,000 feet, where ceibas enjoy temperature. Roadsides, a main place for ceibas. Look at this, stretched along the way here. This is on the road south of Cancun in Mexico, going down towards Playa Carmen and Puerto Morelos and Tulum. These are about every 15 to 20 feet apart. And that reaches a magnitude of 250 per mile. I'm not quite sure why they do it, but everybody knows it's the sacred tree of the Maya in this part of the world, and maybe they're just playing this up for the tourists. Water-related ceibas in large ports, giant ceiba trees over here, and at a small little port at Lake Atitlan in Guatemala is just perfectly aligned with somebody coming out of their boat right there. These swinging bridges, hamacas, are almost always attached, anchored to large ceibas on both sides sometimes. And it happens so much that it cannot be by accident that ceiba trees are planted normally in one of the four corners of bridges all over Central America. In northern Nicaragua, going down the Bocay River, we noticed that there were these ceibas ahead. And at almost every ceiba, there are rapids. So to me, this means they're telling us they plant this ceiba, it's going to be there for a long time, to say, watch out, ahead, there's a rapid. You may have to get out and drag your dugout canoe, or don't dump over. And here, along the Patuca River in eastern Honduras, we noticed rarely, but on occasion, on the side bank, a ceiba tree. And we got out at this place and walk up, and what we find is that this is the trailhead for a path that goes into the interior. It's a marker, as far as I'm concerned, to tell people this is where you stop your boat and get out and take your trip. There are many early historic indications of ceibas. The first drawing I know is from Oviedo in 1526. I think he's attempting here to have a buttressed root system, but look, the model, look how large this tree must be related to these people. And then in the Mexican Aztec Florentine Codex from 1517, there's a great description. This is not a very good rendering of the tree, but the text is a beautiful discussion of the ceiba tree, or as they called it, pochote. By far the most intense expression of ceibas come in the myth and history and landscape of the Maya. And as you move away from the culture hearth, the heartland of the Maya in Yucatan and Guatemala, there is a decrease, a direct decrease in ceibas and people's interest in it. By the time you get to Panama, I haven't found more than 70 ceibas in cultural context. The Maya creation story, oral traditions, they see in the Milky Way the tree. And in the cosmos, the diagram of the cosmos of the Maya, you'll notice that there are directions and they're colored. Red to the east. Oh, let me get back to that. Red to the east, white to the north. West is black, land of death. And in the south is land of the maize, corn. And in the middle are the green tree, the yash che. Yash is green in Maya, and che means tree. It's the center of their world. It is the world tree. Yash che, evidence of ceiba pollen is from Mayan sites, about 1,000. And this is the most rare slide I think I could ever see, because here are the two main plants of the Maya. This is maize. God to the Maya sustains them even today. And this is the pollen of the ceiba. And by strangest coincidence, at the LSU microbiology lab, pollen lab, they found this slide. I just think it's very unusual. I haven't published this yet. I'm going to do it someday. At Chichen Itza, the famous Mayan ruin in Yucatan, here ceibas. There are others around. In Copan, the Mayan ruin in Honduras, there's this giant ceiba. Here, my family walking at the base to give some on occasion, these things, they're growing all over Copan. There are probably 50 there, as a matter of fact. These things eventually fall down, and when they do, the roots uproot the ruins themselves. The antiquity of Ceibas at Copan, in this limestone carving, they're called stelas. This is King Ceiba flower bird, and on the sides of this are glyphs that describe him and his reign. But several of the kings of Copan were named Ceiba. And just like in Bermuda, when royalty comes, they plant a tree. This is Princess from Japan planting a Ceiba tree at Copan when she visited. Ceiba happens to be the national tree of Guatemala. You can see a 1924 coin with a Ceiba on it, and many, many municipios and towns have the Ceiba on their crest. This is a Businessman of the Year award, and it is a gross representation of a Ceiba. By coincidence, I was above Antigua, Guatemala in 2012, and by coincidence, there was a shaman with his buddies planting a Ceiba on a overlook to the town. They didn't mind me taking a photograph. Another instance that brings a smile to my face, I was observing a land dispute in eastern Guatemala near the Honduran border once. And after the dispute was settled, the two villages and their leaders, I said, I'd love to take a photograph of all of you now that it's settled, the dispute. And they said, sure, we know where we want to go, follow us. And we walked about a half a mile, and eventually we came beneath this large yache. And they said, this is where we want to have our photograph taken. This is the new border that separates our lands, and we'll know forever that it's going to be the boundary right here. And this poor Sharon measuring the Guatemala, and in the central plaza of Guatemala City, this tree was planted in 1991, and this is 1990. I had a photograph of it then. 1993, it's grown this much. And in 2017, I used to measure this every time I'd go to Guatemala City. So it's the one place that I have a complete record of tree growth at about 3,000 feet per 5 years. And Sharon is not hugging this tree. She's not a tree hugger. She's measuring it for me. A few quick comments about silk cottons in the Caribbean. There is this Caribbean rimland tradition, which is quite like the mainland tradition. And the rimland in the Caribbean has West African traditions heavy. And instead of it being a sacred place for good, sometimes they view the silk cotton trees as potential evil spaces associated with jumbies and duppies and spirits. I'm not sure people in Bermuda are familiar with those terms. So many people think Bermuda has close ties with the Caribbean. And I know they once did, but I don't know about today. I claim that the most publicized silk cotton tree in the world is that in the center of the Civic Center of Nassau. I went to their archives, and they proudly pulled out this drawing from 1802 to show this tree, and supposedly the same one. There must be 100 postcards and photographs over 150 years of photography of this tree in Nassau. In the parks and at a couple of church cemeteries, you see these giant bases, flanged, buttressed roots. And the same thing here with the church in the background. And there is an Anglican church to the right and a whole line of fairly large ceibas. And the one thing that I found out was the concentration of ceibas in Nassau They are found in the neighborhoods of farmer slaves. The two I know best are Grantstown and Fox Hill. And they're large trees, and even today, because people in the Bahamas think that duppies and spirits live in these trees, they resist and object strenuously to ever cutting them down. So they'll probably just keep to get larger. So finally to Bermuda. I guess the first thing I have to say is I have never seen such enthusiasm for colleagues for my research, and it is heartwarming. My first contact was with Amy at the college, the closest thing I thought to a geographer being there, and she quickly nicknamed what our project was the Ceiba Quest Bermuda. And Miles got involved, and Jennifer got involved, and Charlotte and Anna, and I just want you to know how much I've appreciated your enthusiasm. As far as I know, this is the first attempt to map the distribution of Ceibas on Bermuda by Miles. I wish I had his technological abilities. I don't, but I really appreciate what he's been able to do. They're just a great historical record. The strangest thing to me is you had at least 3 governors who were botanists. And all of them, realizing you had nothing but an island covered with cedars, wanted to bring in exotic species from outside, and they did. And then there's this wonderful story of the Cox tree, John Cox's estate at Orange Valley, that I need to know more about. I did find in the Royal Gazette an 1828 entry that says you have to pay 3 pence import on a silk cotton tree that comes from any British possession. So obviously by 1828, Ceibas were being imported into the island. And there's several visitors' accounts that are contradictory about who planted what tree. At least I know of 16 trees, and I don't know yet. It's still preliminary. I don't know yet about whether they're sacred, ceremonial. But I do know that probably the most important Ceiba on the island is going to be the Ceiba in Somers Garden, which opened in 1920 with Prince Edward. I would die to know. I've read the accounts in the Gazette, and I'd die to know whether he actually planted that tree then or not, because I think it's going to be proven that that's the northernmost Ceiba pentandra in the world, and that is a special Bermuda superlative. I love that Governor Reid guy. I wouldn't want to confront him, but downtown there, he has his park and obelisk, and right across the street in front of Parliament on Reid Street is this really nice Ceiba tree. I'm not sure yet who planted the Ceibas at Government House, and maybe there's only one left. This one at the north west corner of Bernard Park. But that's a beautiful and maybe the largest Ceiba on the island. And then what about this beauty at the old rectory on Ord Road? Several people have sent me their copies of that. But here's going to be the hero tree. I don't doubt it. Here is Somers' obelisk. Here, his heart is in a tomb right down here, close by. And here is this Ceiba pentandra, which I think is going to be known as the northernmost. I want to conclude with a brief statement that I'm going to read, so bear with me. The national tree of Bermuda is Juniperus bermudiana, the cedar. Cedars once covered the island, and it's clear they made Bermuda world famous for its watercraft. Cedars should be the national tree. It is still practical and useful. But today, cedars are too common to be special. On the other hand, Ceiba pentandra, unlike cedars, are rarely seen in groves. Ceibas are independents, each one cultivated for a purpose. They are often majestic, iconic, symmetric, historic, and empathetic. Plant a Ceiba and its branches will embrace you. It will reward by giving personality to a place. From this tree, which infuses humanity into landscapes, islanders can gain inspiration and unity and appreciate the grandeur of nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was absolutely incredible. Just fascinated. Before we take questions, I wondered if we could just segue to Miles. Do you have the interactive map available to share, Miles?
Sure, I can talk about it a little bit. And
hi, Miles.
Hi,
Miles,
Bill.
I'm glad to see you.
And I'm glad to see you too. This is the first time we've had this chance to really see each other.
I'm so
and
happy.
And the same, I'm so sorry you couldn't be here, but I'm so excited to learn all this work you've been doing over the years. And it really seems as though Bermuda Ceiba trees fall right in line with all the insight you were sharing. They're usually close to parks or cemeteries or points of political importance. And they certainly mark parts of our history. So I really want to thank you for sharing all that. I will try and share this map. Let me see. Okay, so actually what's going to happen is, Bill, you're going to have to stop sharing so that I can, it says. And then we'll try.
Are you able to stop share, Bill?
Well,
I think I did. Yeah, I think I stopped.
Good.
Yeah.
You've got it.
So, yeah, what I did once we got in touch was I got quite excited. These trees are pretty rare in Bermuda, but I guess considering how many he mentioned, to have 12 still in Bermuda that I know of is pretty impressive. So, oh, I got to pull my map back up. There's a problem there. So the first thing is I knew that there was 3 in the botanical gardens. And that's really kind of the starting point, I think, for trying to figure out what we've got. That's Terman Hill, sorry. Here we go. So we should be able to click into that. And in fact, there's 3 in the botanical gardens. I'm not going to take you on a tour throughout the whole of the map, but it seems such a fitting place. But what you can see if you do get there, and I know we all go at some point or another, is that one of those Ceiba trees has toppled in a storm not long ago. But the central one on South Shore is easy to see as you drive by. The other 2 are quite tight in on the edge where the old entrance to the service yard was. And I guess the scary thing is when you start to look amongst this map, and hopefully you get a chance to check around Bermuda, what you do see is that many of these trees are at risk. And it's probably because of storms or invasive species. One of the ones at the Botanical Gardens has a relatively large ficus growing out of its crotch. And this is quite concerning. But if you use the map, it does give you a chance to get out and see almost all of them. Of course, we're not encouraging you to go into anyone's yard. but the truth be known, only a handful of these trees are in someone's yard. And that's interesting. Trimmingham Hill has 2. They're quite young, and I haven't been able to find out who planted them. But if you use the map, it also gives you an opportunity to look at the street view. And we have been slowly updating it with photos that we take as well. So you can see some photos, and we encourage you to send photos in if you know of trees that I haven't put up, or you have pictures of these trees from historic time. We'd love to add to our bank of understanding. You can see one in the background for me, hopefully, and that's my favorite in Bermuda. I know it's not the one in Summers Garden, but it's the old Rectory near Ord Road, and I grew up around this tree and in that area, and it's still, I think, the most glorious of them. It hasn't suffered much wind damage, and its buttressing is stunning. So you can see that driving down the road on Ord Road, and the old Rectory building itself is not there anymore, so it's even easier to see and stands out. I won't spend a lot of time sharing too much more, but again, there are some photos there. There's beautiful examples on the railway trail. I know that Bill mentioned there was one at Marsh Folly. Actually, there's two there. It's hard to see the second one. It's a smaller one on the left in the picture. If you can get there in the near future, they're going into flower right now. So that's quite an exciting thing to check out. You can see those flowers. Most of them are quite high up. If you got some binoculars, good use. Otherwise, there's a couple flowers I've noticed quite close to the road. You should get a chance to see them this week, maybe next week. So yeah, check out the map if you get a chance. Go ahead. I think if you type in Bermuda Ceiba pentandra tour, you should be able to find it. If you're having any further concern in finding it that way, just reach out to me directly or Anna, and I'm sure we can get that to you. But it is made available publicly on Google Maps.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that input, Miles. And yeah, if anybody needs to get hold of us, it's miles@bnt.bm. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. So it's question time now. If anybody has a question, if you could just raise your hand, I'll come to you and unmute. There's lots and lots of people in here this evening. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, Anna.
Hey.
Good evening. I was just curious to know Bill, what is the oldest Ceiba that you've been able to identify?
In the folklore, you can find people in Yucatan that will proclaim they're 500 years old or so, but I'm thinking the one that I showed in Nassau, there's some primary evidence that it might have come by 1750, and it died in about 1950 or so. So as best I can say, it's about 200 years old, although the folklore will put it to 1,000 years or 500 years, but I don't think they are as old as people think. And of course, the wood's very soft, and I don't know about boring any of them to actually find out that. So
that's in the Bahamas. What about in Guatemala? What is the oldest tree you were able to identify there?
I cannot give an oldest tree there. The largest tree the girth of the largest tree we measured there was 66 feet.
Good grief.
But I don't know much about the antiquity of the trees. That's one great problem. How do you find out how old trees are if you can't core them?
True that. And are they're still being planted?
Absolutely, but more in a modern tourism context than in the traditional Mayan areas. You've got to be a true old-fashioned guy who will go out in the middle of his milpa or field and plant one in the center, which is what all of them used to do. Just tough. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Cancun?
Is there any commercial value to the Kapok itself?
Well, some people used to think it was such a soft wood you could make a quick canoe out of them, but most natives don't want to do that because they don't last very long. And aside from the silk cotton, which they do use still to stuff mattresses and pillows. That's about the only commercial value that I think I know. Some Mayans will use some for medicines. There are certain medicinal values they can get.
Okay, there's actually a good segue into a question from Dirta, which is, what are the medicinal properties of the Ceiba?
Meaning what? What additional properties? Such
medicinal.
I don't know any details. They just tell me sometimes they grind up the seeds and they can use it.
Okay, and we have a question from Val. Val, there we go.
Do all of the varieties have the thorny trunks?
Yeah, I think the answer is absolutely not. Most do. You know, there are 3 or 4 main varieties of Ceibas, but I attempt to grow different ones. I've got one right behind me here, and I attempt to grow them all the time. And of all of the Ceibas I have grown myself from seeds or cuttings, none have the spikes or the little thorns that grow up and down. And some of them are covered completely with thorns. So not all of them are for certain.
Do the thorns show up more with the mature plants, or do they start from young?
They start young. Daryl, do you have thorns on any of the Ceibas in Bermuda?
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Bill, I have a question for Miles. Miles, were you able to identify do you have in your catalog there the Ceiba that's in Dunbarton, in the house behind Bacardi?
Thank you. I forgot about that tree, and that's a very good point. No, I didn't put that one in there, so I will add that to the map. And I know the tree well. I know exactly what you're talking about. So thank you.
Yay, another tree.
Yes, another one, and it's in town. I can get that on the map quickly. Yeah.
Well, does anyone know the status of the Ceiba that John Cox talked about in his memoir?
I couldn't get hold of any sightings of it, and my thing was there is one on Middle Road in Devonshire near what I would have imagined was the Cox family's property, but I think it's closer to Mayflower, right on the roadside. But maybe Kevin, do you know?
Opposite Mayflower, Miles, there is the southern oak, vast, great, big, spreading canopy of the southern oak, and the Orange Valley would be the place for Sir John Cox's old homestead. Would be where you would find the kapok tree. We used to always seem to call them as kapok trees here, but just going back to the Dunbarton tree, we actually built an enormous tree house in the Dunbarton kapok, and it was very thorny. We had people who were building tree houses for observation in the tropics came down to the island to help us with the construction of this house, and then we put a zip line into the pool. It's quite a spectacular tree.
A cultural use I hadn't envisioned.
No. But no,
what about the 2 members of the Botanical Society that had bonsai trees? Is there any place on Bermuda that you can acquire seeds or saplings if you wanted to plant them?
It's Jennifer here. Unfortunately, the George, who has the bonsai ones, is off island at the moment. He and his wife are both off island. George is the gentleman who is standing by the Ceiba tree in the botanical gardens. Yes, but he's not here at the moment, I'm afraid, to answer that.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for surveying your membership. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. I do have a question for you here. When I was in the botanical gardens one time, a visitor said to me that he was familiar with the Kapoks from Indonesia. And I took him at his word. And he said there that historically, the pirates had used the seeds, the fluff from the seeds, to stuff vests, not to be life vests when they were out at sea, but to stop buckshot so that they wouldn't be killed. Yeah.
That's great. We have another hand up here from John.
Hello, Bill. Bill?
We can hear
Professor, is that Professor Geigel?
Yeah, somewhat. Yes. Yeah, thank you for your invitation to this actually very interesting presentation you had. I
Thanks,
did want
John.
to, yes, I did want to, one of you care to speculate on or expand upon the human coincidence of propagation with the Ceiba tree, and whether or not there isn't some sort of Juanito Ceiba seeder in the tradition that perhaps a shaman who would go around and plant these things on a widespread basis. And finally, how many Ceiba trees have you planted?
Me? Well, my largest one, in 3 years in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, had to bring it inside my house in the wintertime. In 3 years, it was 15 feet tall, grew 7 feet the first year. And I've got 2 growing now here, about 1.5 years old, but it's in the house. John, about the first question about I used to ask the people on the road who planted the trees on the curves, and 100% of the informants said, oh, they grow there naturally. And I used to, of course they don't, such a coincidence, somebody's planting them. And so I used to say they're a group of ninja Ceiba shamans who at night would sneak out and place Ceibas in special places, because quite frankly, I rarely see a Ceiba that I think propagates naturally. And all over Latin America, for the most part, people say they're there naturally, but they're planted.
Interesting.
So to say planted, if I can ask, are there any sort of natural forests of these trees, or are they're all, do they self-seed and propagate out in the wild, or are they just individually planted?
Well, I am certain they're naturally propagated Ceibas, some places. I've tramped all of the forests in Central America, and on occasion I find some that are there. But I must tell you, I've seen baby saplings that must have come from seeds underneath the tree, but I've never seen a grove of Ceibas in my life anywhere. Why? I have no idea. I don't know about the physical trees and why it should or not be that way. The only place I know where there's a legitimate grove is in a place in northwestern El Salvador that's called La Casa Bruja, the witch's house. And surrounding that, there are probably about 20 Ceiba trees. But I've never seen a natural grove in the forest. But there must be natural propagation of the tree. I don't know anything about the process of domestication of plants, but I think somebody someday will almost declare that the Ceiba pentandra is a domesticated. Miles, you think there's any chance that there's been a naturally propagated Ceiba on Bahama?
On Bermuda, looking at the locations of the trees,
Right.
Yeah, they're all planted in spaces where they would be highlighted or by tree collectors. Yeah, they all seem to serve some purpose.
Yeah. It's just hard to say that they're not naturally propagated. They've got to be.
Yeah, I mean, there are two at Trimmingham Hill as well on the roadside at the roundabout. And it's interesting, but they both look to be the same size. They're not big. And I was going to do a little look to see if I can find out who may have propagated them. At a guess, I would have thought they're about 40 or 50. So, yeah, I think they were all planted.
Okay, do we have any further questions? Well, then I shall pass our grateful thanks on to Bill for his time in putting together this wonderful and informative talk for the Bermuda National Trust. So with our most sincere thanks, Bill, and as soon as you get to Bermuda, you must let us know you're here.
Well, thank you all so much for your support. I've never seen a group of colleagues in my life. It is that simple. You guys are incredible. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks for your work, Miles.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thank you.